Ya, ahora sí.
El link lo pueden transmitir, Marco, por las redes sociales, por favor.
Marco, ¿estás ahí?
Sí, aquí estoy, ¿me repiten?
Que si puedes transmitir, puedes copiar el link de YouTube y transmitirlo por las redes sociales.
El link de YouTube está en vivo, o sea, ¿esto en vivo?
Sí, está en vivo.
Sí, pero no tengo el Social Pilot. Creo que lo tiene solamente Saúl configurado.
Ok.
A ver.
No sé cómo sacar el link. ¿Pero este?
Puedes ponerle ahí en YouTube, en la flechita, y donde
Sí,
dice
estoy en
Live
eso.
on YouTube, ahí aparece. Hi, Sam.
Aquí lo tengo.
Mira, Marco, aquí está, ahí está el link de YouTube en el chat. Ok. Creo que tenemos que empezar a aceptar.
Sí, hay que aceptar a la gente ya.
Okay.
¿Puedes poner la presentación, Rosario, por favor?
Sí, sí. Voy. Dame un segundo.
Ok, ahora sí ya va a empezar el evento, perdón. Oh, ya voy a empezar. Ya no me puedo mover. Sorry. Welcome everybody. Welcome to another session of Science Talks. Please, before starting, follow the instructions in the screen. Choose the language of your preference. First, put the interpretation button, the language you prefer, could be English or Spanish, and then select original audio. We're going to give you 2 minutes to address the language of your preference. Again, select the language you prefer, could be English or Spanish, and mute the original audio. Today in Science Talks, we're going to talk about Pray for Rain and the new hurricane season, impacts on the border regions. Can we go to the next one? So today, our speakers will be Dr. Amalia Ruiz de Alegría Alzaburu, Grace Gomez Quiroga, and Santos Subash Falmate. Thank you to our sponsors for making this forum possible and for making this event possible. Can we go to the next one, please? So today we are with you, Rosario Sanchez. She is a senior research scientist in the Texas Water Resources Institute, and she is also our director.
Thank you, Gabby. Good afternoon, and happy to see you all again for another event of the Permanent Forum of Binational Waters. And of course, we're going to talk about water and our border, But now let's talk about the expectations on how much hurricane we can rely on for the future, right? That's the big question. Anyway, I'm going to introduce the host of this event, which is Gabriela Rendon. She's our communication strategic planning of the forum. She's also a graduate student researcher at UC Davis and water, wildlife, and environmental conservation specialist. Thank you, Gabby. And let's move with our speakers today.
Thank you, Rosario.
Okay, I'm going to start with Dr. Amalia Ruiz de Alegría Arzaburu. I must say, I love your name and I love your last name, especially the Alegría part. How do you deal with that? Anyway, thank you for being here. She's a research scientist at the Institute of Oceanography Research in the Universidad Autónoma de Baja California. She holds a PhD in coastal morphodynamics at the University of Plymouth, UK in 2010, and a postdoc at the Institute of Engineering of the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM. She has held level 1 of the National Research System of CONACYT. Since 2013, she has led many national and international research projects involving nearshore hydrodynamics, beach morphodynamics, and sediment transport processes. She has been advisor of many graduate and undergraduate theses and has been the author and co-author of more than 25 peer-reviewed articles. She's part of the editorial advisory board of the journal Frontiers in Marine Geosciences and of the Boletín de la Sociedad Geológica Mexicana. Thank you, Amalia, for being here today.
Then we have Grace Gomez Quiroga. She's a hydrologist and environmental specialist and a very dear friend. Grace holds a master's degree in hydrology science program at the University of California, Davis, with the support of a Fulbright Garcia Robles scholarship. Very impressive. After earning a bachelor's degree in environmental engineering, Grace worked in Mexico for public and private institutions in the field of environmental assessment and planning, including water resources. Grace's research will focus on sustainable science-based water policies and climate adaptation strategies in the Rio Grande Bravo Basin. Welcome, Grace.
We also have Dr. Santosh Subhash Palmate. He is assistant professor of arid hydrology and water systems at Texas A&M AgriLife Research and Extension Service. He serves as a content expert and community resource in Far West Texas. He's also affiliated with the Department of Biological and Agricultural and Engineering at Texas A&M University. He works on sustainable management of water resources in arid and semi-arid regions. He supports the development of resilient water practices, with a special emphasis on the regional hydrological systems in the transboundary areas of Texas. He utilizes advanced remote sensing and geographical information systems to understand the linkages and feedback mechanisms between water, climate, agriculture, urban stakeholders, and socioeconomy. Dr. Palmate leads the AgriLife education outreach and community events in El Paso. His role is crucial in the El Paso Center to integrate AgriLife research and AgriLife extension programs for community development. Thank you for being here today.
Okay, now time for instructions for this dynamic. So every participant will answer some of the questions we have. Each of you will have 5 minutes to maximum to answer the question. If you have questions for each other, or if the public have questions or comments, please leave your comments in the chat. We will collect your comments and questions, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So again, thanks for joining us, and let me start with the first questions. So according to your findings, is the hurricane season shifting? If so, how is it going? So we're going to start with Amalia.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, my first thinking was that there is evidence that hurricanes have come close to the Pacific border region. Despite their occurrence being really sporadic, I mean, they happen very not very often. When they arrive, when hurricanes come to this region, they cause quite a bit of problems. So this slide basically shows a snapshot of a paper that came out in 2004, where these authors highlight that a hurricane actually hit San Diego, the California San Diego area, in October, on the 2nd of October, 1858. So after that event, risk managers and local communities changed their point of view. So nowadays we know that hurricanes happen earlier and they are increasing in frequency and perhaps intensity. But the truth is that there are not enough data yet to prove that in this region. And again, I'm talking about the Cali Baja region, border region, where I live. So on the right-hand side, the image shows the actual NOAA historical hurricane tracks coming across the Pacific. And as you can see, there are in total 12 with Hurricane Hilary that happened this year, a few months ago. So they are very, very few events that come close by. And so far, the only one that actually landed as a hurricane as such, it was that event in 1858. Next, please. So what do we need for hurricanes to happen, to occur? We basically need, next, please. We need warm water and also adequate atmospheric conditions. And because we know that climate is changing, and since 2016, ocean waters are warming up, perhaps these events may happen more frequently. And this is the discussion point in the scientific community at the moment. Next, please. So what I want to say is that even though the number of hurricanes in the Cali Baja region are nothing compared to other sites in the US and Mexico, I mean, we know how often hurricanes go through the Gulf of Mexico or even the southern Baja California Peninsula. Next, please. We need to start thinking of being prepared. We need to be prepared, and communities should start getting prepared to the perhaps occurrence of these events more frequently, because at the current times, communities are poorly prepared, and basically we need to plan adaptation measures to new conditions of, next please, of extreme water levels, flooding basically, and extreme rains. And I just want to end up this question showing a highlight of the impact of Hurricane Hilary in the Southern California area. And the highlight from ABC News says that this is the event that happened after the 1997 hurricane, which basically was Nora. If you look in the right-hand side, you see the historical hurricane tracks. And as you can see, Nora in 1997 in pink, that was the one that got the closest to us. And since 1997, this other hurricane in 2023, Hilary, came across. So I just want to end up saying that we need more data, but also we need to be aware of them, and we need to start preparing ourselves for perhaps more frequent and events of this intensity. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. Very interesting. Now we go with Grace.
Thank you. Should I start now? Okay. Well, about my research, it takes a look at flood events in the Rio Grande Bravo Basin during the last century using natural and regulated streamflow data. So the natural streamflow data can be used as a proxy for climate. It offers a glimpse at how climate varies throughout the years. And the data used was obtained by two research teams, one at the Utah State University and another at University of California, Davis. And it is a reconstruction of natural streamflow using mass balance models and regulated streamflow records, reservoir levels, and such. So for this research, floods were defined as the maximum discharge which occurs in a day, in a given year. And this graph here shows the magnitude of the peak flows below Presidio Ojinaga from the 1900s to 2015, with stream flow in cubic meters per second. Since, as you can see, that location is in the map in the right-hand side, right below the confluence of the Rio Conchos and the middle and upper part of the Rio Grande. So each of these peak flows in the graph, they are the combined result of snowmelt in their northern branch and rainfall events in the southern branch due to monsoon rains and tropical storms. Next slide, please. So to answer this question and to understand how my research can address this question, we have to make a few considerations. The southern branch, as I said, is the main contributor of discharge, and this figure shows flood magnitudes ranked from smallest to largest in cubic meters per second. And as you can see, peak flows in the northern branch, which are shown in reds and yellows, they vary very little in magnitude, while in the southern branch, each gauging station shows larger increments in magnitude. So natural discharge at the river outlet largely depends on monsoons and tropical storms. Since the main variable I analyzed was river stream flow, my research offers a very indirect look at hurricanes, but I believe we can gain some insights from looking at the results. Next slide, please. These violin plots show flood timing, which is the day of the year in which the largest river discharge occurs at each control point. The first violin plots represent the northern branch, while the other 6 represent the southern branch. And as you can see, there is a distinct difference between peak flow timing in the northern and southern branches, with snowmelt peak flows occurring in late spring and monsoon and tropical storms peak flows occurring in late summer. The last 3 control points show the combination of the 2 climatically distinct headwaters with a bimodal distribution, some events occurring in spring and some in late summer. Next slide, please. If we disaggregate data points across time in 4 time periods from 1900s to 1930s, 1930s to 1960s and such, if we focus on the southern branch, we can see there is very little variation in the median flood timing, with few exceptions in the 2nd and 4th panels. More robust statistical tests would be necessary to assess the changes in flood timing over the years. These findings would be a very indirect and remote indication that there is little variation in the timing of tropical storms. And an interesting research question would be to understand the distinct contributions of base flow, monsoon rains, and tropical storms to the total river discharge to understand annual median stream flow. Next slide, please. I think, yeah. Another result I obtained was flood magnitude estimates in windows of 20 years using the annual peak flow data and a distribution function. And this figure shows the 2, 5, and 10-year flood estimates from 1900 to 2015 in cubic meters per second. In respect to hurricanes, the most relevant result is the observed trend of lower and higher flood magnitudes across time. Again, However, this variation cannot be directly attributed to hurricanes. Most likely, I believe, it is related to the North American monsoon. Another interesting research question would be, what is the correlation between peak flow magnitude and median annual stream flow? That is, if there is any correspondence between wet and dry years and the magnitude of peak flows, if there is a trend at all. I mean, if hurricanes tend to occur during wet or dry periods, there is a trend at all. I did run a test to check the correlation between median annual stream flow, and I found that the closer to the river outlet, the lower the correlation between median annual stream flow and peak flow, which means that in many cases, median annual stream flow does not predict the magnitude of the annual peak flow. And that would be it. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. Amazing. And now we're going to Santosh. Same question.
Yeah, so these are the findings from some of the well-known websites from the National Weather Center. So because of the hurricane, there are some evidences that heavy rain and high winds are majorly occurring on Texas and Mexico border. So I'm working majorly for Far West Texas region, and I'm dealing with the hydrology and water balances or changes due to climate. So what is happening? So as you see here, from historical, it's more than 100 years. You guys can see how the hurricanes are coming from the Gulf of Mexico and how their magnitude and frequency is changing. Is in the middle plot, you can see there is no hurricane on the border region happen, but recently also there are a couple of hurricanes are happen in the border region. So this is something hurricane with the tropical storms. They are impacting on these regions, and these are evidence-based some figures, and we can see these are the also this is most important consideration for understanding river flows and changes in the activities. So this is some of the evidences I found. Can you go to the next? Okay, so so this is actually some of the initial analyses we usually do to understand weather condition around El Paso. I'm located in El Paso region, and these are the plots we prepared using the wind data sets that we got from the weather station located in Socorro town. And we are so this is for short interval, I understand, but it is just like my interpretation to show how wind is changing in a decade or how it's changing in a couple of years. So magnitude is nearly same. It's just like direction of the wind is also changing. I think that's something we should also consider why it's happening, and these are some reasons why hurricane is changing in this region. Yeah, I think these are only 2 slides.
Well, we were actually very curious about those graphs, so thank you very much for that explanation. We're going to the next question with Rosario.
Thank you, Gabby. Jess, the next question is, so what are the implications of these changes, if any, in terms of ecosystems, agricultural practices, and public policy? So it's a big question. And we're going to start with Malia. Let me quickly get into your slides.
Yes, that's a big question. And because I work in coastal morphodynamics, I'm going to focus on typical changes that we obtain after hurricanes hit the coastline. So we basically lose the natural protection. There is a loss of natural protection associated to extreme erosion. So these are a couple of examples of Hurricane Matthew that hit Florida some years ago in 2016. And I just want to show how the coastline looked before the top images, for example, in September 2014, and how the coast changed after the impact of the hurricane. So these are images taken from the USGS, and I just want to show how powerful these events are and the large change they cause. They cause large dune and beach face erosion, which are the images on the left, and it can also happen barrier beach breaching. So when breaching happens, the open ocean waters connect to coastal lagoons, for example, and those exchanges of water also cause large changes to the ecosystem. Next, please. Yeah, so I just saying that this is Florida, but this could happen in our region too, in the Cali Baja region. So we need to start thinking of possible impacts similar to this. So as I said, not only erosion happens, but also natural ecosystems can change. And this is an example for kelp forests, which are very rich ecosystems that located in the Cali Baja region. So in this California and Baja California region, kelp forests are very important ecosystems that we know change a lot related to storm events. And there is this interesting article from 1989 from Seymour and collaborators that they show how kelp forests were washed away after storms that hit the coastline in the 1980s, so on. But what I want to say is that perhaps if future hurricanes hit this coastline, they can cause significant changes to the kelp forests and change our ecosystems. Next. So this photo is taken from Scripps Oceanography from UCSD. That's a nice picture. We're showing the kelp forests and fish and different plants and animals. And so basically the question is whether these ecosystems will withstand future events. And so all these changes imply perhaps public policy adaptations. So I guess in the future, risk management and planning will need to be adjusted if these extreme events start happening more often in our coastline. And these two photos are from San Diego, Sunset Cliffs on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, we see cliff instability in the Rosarito area in Baja California. So our coastline is very cliffy, and it suffers from storm-induced erosion, and also it's highly populated. So these events can in the future change our coastline significantly, and therefore we need to be prepared for future for these events. And again, I want to end up just highlighting this article where after the publication of this article, public policy changed, and coastal managers and planners started the planning in a different manner. Thank you.
And Grace, same question to you. What are the implications of these changes in terms of ecosystems ag practices, and public policy.
Thank you. So given the nature of the data I used, my research findings do not show an explicit link between floods and hurricanes, nor do they present a significant trend. So more detailed work would be needed to correlate both variables. However, the status quo, as we know, the RGB has suffered drastic changes in the last century. So human alterations are the biggest driver of change in the basin, altering the natural hydrology and degrading river health. So in a healthy river, floods occur as part of a natural flow regime. They support habitat creation by resetting the channel. They regulate water quality, they control invasive species, and they provide life cycle cues to fish and other species. These figures present the most drastic results I obtained in my research. They compare the natural versus the regulated 10-year flood estimates in two control points, one below Ojinaga, which is directly below the confluence of the Rio Conchos and the Rio Grande, and then another one, which is San Salduas, which is close to the river outlet. In the regulated regime, channel resetting floods have less than 90% chance of occurring since the 1950s, and other stations have similar behavior with magnitudes decreasing drastically since the 1950s. And an alarming result is that floods at Salduas, which is a control point, the closest to the river outlet, floods here are are smaller, way smaller than floods which occur upstream, which is like the regulated hydrology has reversed the flood characteristics. So as we know, the situation is already dire, and added uncertainty due to changes in the hurricane season will further complicate implementing environmental flows, which is what I focus my research on. Given the existing needs for water, the competing needs, which are proving hard to conciliate. Next slide, please. So research shows it is possible to implement environmental flows which reproduce the functions of floods. There is research from the World Wildlife Fund for Rio Conchos for 9 locations, and they drafted recommendations for magnitudes and frequency of floods. And also my research advisor, Sam Sandoval, and his own research advisor in Texas, they estimated the maximum volume of environmental flows that can be allocated in the Big Bend region without compromising human water management goals, including water demand and flooding risk in communities. But now, estimating and implementing environmental flows recommendations will become more challenging to the changing hurricane season, which has now proven to be like an important contribution to stream flow. Again, I would ask like what percentage of what amount of water due to rainfall events from tropical storms contributes to total stream flow. That would be an interesting question.
Looks like we have more questions than answers. Of course, that's the way it's supposed to be. Santos, you're next. Thank you.
Yes. So my understanding is because of the hurricane, there are so many issues on land and water management. You guys understand how flooding and river flooding will happen because of that. Also, there is major issue is water allocation in this region that will be impacted also because of the slopey, some land topography, some landslides can also happen. And El Paso is, I think, one of the major urban area, like always facing some of these kind of issues. So also, when I look to the, according to the agriculture specs, so there is a change in soil and water will also happen. And because of the hurricane, there is also impact on agriculture management practices. It includes irrigation scheduling. If something is, a weather warning is there, then farmers need to change their irrigation timing. So that's something happen. And also because of the high wind, fertilizer or pesticide application, that will also have impact on and their timing also. So this is some of the issues. Because of the high wind also, there will be issue with crop harvesting, and there could be some damage can also happen. So this kind of issues will impact on overall food production in the border region. There are some news on the public, how it's impacting on public infrastructure. So I think you guys can see the resource there. Because of the hurricane, there is always issue on building and maintaining border fences around the border around this region, and also the structures around the river. They're also like not like strong one. So that's something issue, and because of the flood, roadways are also washing out. So that's another issue. So if you guys, I think you guys more understand. I'm just working here from last 3 years, but you guys are aware about how hurricanes are impacting on Central America, and that's the reason there is a news. I saw that I found a couple of sources there that people are migrating from Central America to US-Mexico border because of these hurricanes, and because of this migration, there is higher chances that there will be more more violence, as well as food insecurity and poverty will be out on the border region. So these are some of the issues can be happen, or like I see these are some impacts. Can you go to the next? So as a hydrologist, I always look how it's impacting on water movement or something around this region. So base management practices, nothing but the practices that already applied on the field to minimize losses from climate change or land use or any anthropogenic activities. So these are some examples I have mentioned here, listed out. And because of the hurricane, there will be impact on these base management practices, or these structures, or their maintenance. So to keeping this efficiency of these kind of BMPs for a long time, we have to maintain this kind of base management practices. And because of the hurricane, there will be impact on their maintenance schedule as well as their efficiency. So this kind of issue will happen. That's my understanding. And there is also, I think, previous panelists, they already mentioned there will be higher impact on river flows and river hydrology too. So this is all relevant to regional or boundary area. As you guys also are aware about, Mexico and Texas, their border is divided on the Rio Grande River. So that river area is also I think maintenance, or that area maintenance is also impacted by this kind of events.
Thank you very much.
Santos.
Okay, now we go to the third question. So what can we expect as a new normality in these sensitive environments in the border region? So Amalia, can you tell us?
Well, that's an interesting question. In order to know the new normality, we need to get more reliable data sets and models and so on. But I assume that in the Pacific US-Mexico border, where I live, the low-lying regions, low-lying coastlines and cities and estuarine environments should be the most sensitive environments. And not only because of being low, but also because they are populated areas. So on the left-hand side, you have an image from Playas de Rosarito in Baja California, and on the right-hand side, you see San Diego River Estuary. And these two sites, for example, get flooded very often when high water levels happen related to storms. So I'm assuming that in future, we are expecting these highly populated low-lying regions to be the most sensitive to hurricane impacts. Next. And so basically what we need to do is we need to measure, we need to collect more data in order to build up reliable data sets and reliable trends. And so I just encourage long-term monitoring programs. And this figure here is taken from an article from the Arctic, I think it is. And I don't want to take a look at the data itself, but I want to show that in general, models are struggling with future predictions, and there are different directions from different climate change scenarios. So in blue, for example, we have a low a scenario, meaning that a not very a low scenario, and in red we have high SSP 5, 8.5 risk, climate change risks. So basically, we can see that after 2050, trends are taking different directions. And next, please. So basically, what we need to do is we need to collect more data. The more data we collect, the more reliable our predictive models will be. And so what type of data, you would ask? We need to measure atmospheric conditions and oceanic conditions in order to characterize these events better. And then we should have coastal monitoring programs to precisely measure flooding impacts and coastal changes like coastal erosion, shoreline shifts, and so on. And then with all this data, we can feed models, numerical models, in order to get more reliable predictions. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Maya. Yeah, I think that's always the issue in science. We never get enough monitoring. Okay, Grace, what about you? What do you think about this question?
Well, I think changes to the hurricane seasons, they could include both extremes. Longer, drier periods and more intense rainfall events some years. So the already sensitive environment is the river mainstem, for example, and we would expect further habitat loss because we have in the drier periods, we would have lower discharge, so we would have more sediment accumulation, channel narrowing, vegetation growth, bank stabilization. So the river will stop having its meandering. Well, it doesn't have it now, but there would be less chance for the river to recover its wide and meandering shape. In the inland, there would be less rainfall, so crop failure and lower water availability for human consumption, but also higher flooding risks, which would jeopardize border towns. Floods already do, like the Presidio, Ojinaga towns, they have experienced flooding, Reynosa also. And maybe random floods could reset the river channel, which would be like a positive effect, random effect, we don't know. But I think many variables will be put to the test, like the water storage capacity, flood risk management, timely water supply, environmental flows implementation. And I was remembering that while I was doing my research for this environmental flows and floods thesis, I read a paper about hurricanes hitting and or approximating the Rio Conchos. And I think the trend was that the hurricanes in the Atlantic Ocean was not changing, but some of I believe the frequency of hurricanes in the Pacific Ocean was slightly increasing, but there were no robust statistical tests to prove it again. And also Samuel Sandoval, my research advisor, he has a report which correlates hurricane events and peak flows and how that relates to the fulfillment of the Treaty of 1944, which establishes how the water is allocated. And well, something interesting about the paper about the hurricanes was that hurricane intensity does not equal the total amount of rainfall. So that is also another question, like when do hurricanes happen? How does intensity correlate with total rainfall? And then if there is a trend at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. So yeah, more questions and answers. Then we are going now to Santosh. So go on, Santosh.
Yes. So I'm not well familiar with this around this sensitive environment area on this for whatever reason, but I think my my work is mostly related to water management for agriculture as well as urban. I'm very new to the urban sector, but I'm very much familiar with the agriculture sector. So my understanding is uh, there will be also always impact or issues with the water allocation and irrigation scheduling or the timing, and also other agriculture practices like pesticide application or any tillage operations kind of, also harvesting. So that will eventually affect on regional food productions. So I think these are maybe common on US side as well as Mexico side, but I think the pecan is on both sides. So I'm considering those are like happening on the both sides. So we have to understand, like we have to consider all these management practices, or uh, especially during the hurricane season, that's June first to like June to November. And so I think I will add few points. That's something. How do we prepare? I think. Can you go to the next slide? So I understand local peoples, they are more familiar with the situation, how they can deal with the hurricane or the impacts. But there are some awareness. I think our peoples, those are not serious with those kind of understanding of preparedness. I would like to highlight some of the points here. How to prepare, like strengthening their home. Like if there is any loose items outside the home, they should bring in the home, or any pets or kind of animals they can bring in home for the safety. Also about the insurance, we usually have auto insurance, but also our home insurance should also uh, cover these kind of impacts. So we need to update our insurance also. If you are traveling or if you are living in a place, and if something like hurricane is impacting, then you should also aware about alternate route of evacuation, right? So these are some kind of preparedness you should be you should know about. And also because of the hurricane, there will be different impacts. Because of the heavy rain, there is another impact, or because of high winds, there is another kind of impact. So you should also understand your surroundings around you and also their impacts. And people need to get aware about this kind of forecast information through television or any social media or from friends or any radio channels. So all these information I would like to share, because I think this is good platform. I think all the binational stakeholders or peoples are participating, so they should also aware about. So this source is also always available, and new hurricane forecast information you can see from NOAA's National Hurricane Center, and it's easily available. And our usually our uh, radio channels, they announce this kind of any kind of alert issue situation. So I think these are, yeah. Oh, there is maybe one more. Okay, yeah. So this one is my hydrology work is mostly on river plus aquifers. Those are like transboundary river basins aquifers majorly. So I'm working particularly right now for Power West Texas, but I'm planning to work for different stakeholders or other arid and semi-arid regions in the United States, especially transboundary areas, like water areas. Yeah, so this is, I think the mesh is always coming up from NOAA's website, like stay safe, stay alive. Yeah, thanks.
Rosario, that's your map.
Oh, I think one map is from Dr. Rosario's paper. Yeah, I'm always following that. I never got this kind of like all detailed information in one place. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much. Very interesting presentations, all of you. Well, now we're gonna go to the Q&A session. So Rosario is gonna lead the Q&A from the public. So if you have any questions, comments, also if the speakers would like to ask questions to each other, you can also put your question in the chat. So yeah, let's go to it.
Thank you, Gabby, and thank you, speakers. So before we get to that, I just wrote a couple of lines. So we need to be prepared for the unknown. So uncertainty is still going to govern basically the next, I guess, 15 years or so. And that aligns pretty well with the IPCC reports on climate change and precipitation, because it's pretty uncertain too. And the hurricane season, which is water, again, just in different frequency and magnitude. So uncertainty still governs. However, if you go back and we read the title of this science talk, it starts with "Pray for Rain" and it's quoted because it's a quote. I mean, it's pretty popular, at least on the Rio Grande Basin, every 5 years. So it's like, oh my God, are we going to have enough water this year to comply with the 1944 treaty? I know that we didn't touch on that and we didn't want to get into that, but we use it. I mean, we expect it. In a way, we actually rely on it, right? Like, yeah, the hurricane season is coming somewhere in September. Let's wait for the reservoir to fill it up. So the reliance part of it, it's what is the worry, the important, the interesting part. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that. I mean, I have my own thoughts on that, but I wanted to get you from the experts on how can, if we know this level of uncertainty, how long is it going to take us to start relying on, on the, I guess, the habit of the trend, the usual trend that we used to have, then now it seems to be going, we have no idea. So what will be your recommendation, I guess? Okay, you're waiting for me to say who wants to answer? Okay, great. Go ahead.
Thank you. This is something I usually think about when, like, in any environmental degradation issue, like if we face so much uncertainty, what can we do? Well, I think, like, for instance, in terms of environmental flows, we already know the science, we already know what needs to be done. So in face of uncertainty, the least we could do is to implement what we already know, I guess. Like, the situation is already dire. The extinction and endangered species, they still need their habitat. So I think what we have set up in terms of environmental flows, like, the science is robust. And I think that we can move in that direction. Of course, there's a lot of resistance, but that would be the starting point, I guess.
Amalia?
Yes, I was just wondering, like, for example, for hurricane impacts, definitely the Gulf of Mexico area they have plenty of events and records and data. But thinking a little bit on the Pacific coast, that's harder. I mean, the uncertainty is much larger. I mean, only 12 events since 1950s. That's very, very few. So we don't really know what's happening. We know that ocean temperature is rising. And then on the top of that, we have these El Nino combinations and El Nino, La Nina, and so everything is shifting and changing. So yeah, I don't know. I have more questions than answer on that.
We should keep praying, I guess. Santos, do you have a comment on that?
So I agree, like hurricane from the Gulf of Mexico, they are more than on Pacific side. And my understanding or whatever I have read until today, so in throughout the Texas also, their impact is on more on the western side and the coastal side even. And border region, when you are right now we are talking about, but there is still influence on that too. Yeah, I think that's the one.
I'm going to go quickly to a couple of questions from the audience here. One very straightforward. I don't know if any of you would able to answer. Is the sea level rising? That's from Jerry. Just like that, is the sea level rising? Amaya, you're from the coast.
I mean, it depends on where. I mean, trends are showing it's going up, but how far up, then it depends on where we are. And but definitely that's something that needs to be considered for future planning. And I mean, sea level is rising slowly. And on the top of that, we have extreme events coming over. So extreme water levels are more frequent. So we have higher water levels happening more often. And on the top of that, we have a trend that shows the shift, the upper shift of that level. So yeah, I was also reading some other questions like Samuel Sandoval. He says that there are for flood insurance, for example, that flood maps exist, and that there is a classification of high risk and low risk areas for flooding in the US. Definitely they exist, but those maps rely on these models that at the same time rely on data, and the data sometimes data are not enough to completely rely on models, right? So what we want to do for the future, we need more data. We need to keep on measuring and monitoring so that these models readjust to reality. That's what I would say.
We have other questions here from Samuel. Samuel, do you want to share them with the public as well? I think you are not in the English channel.
Yeah, you need to be in the English channel.
We cannot hear you.
We cannot hear you, Sam.
I think you're on the English channel. You need to be in the English channel.
No. Oh, no, I think now you can hear me.
Yeah,
Yes.
we
Okay.
can hear you now.
Sorry. Gracias, Amaya. Thank you. So, I mean, I have kind of my train of thought has been, and I'm not an ocean scientist. That's what I'm asking you. So, the ocean is getting warmer. And if it gets warmer, so the first question is, are we going to have more extreme events? The second one is that if it is getting warmer, is it getting warmer or is it moving north? And if the warm ocean is getting north, then are we going to have more extreme events northern than we're used to? And I'm just thinking mostly on the Pacific coast in Baja California, California. And then the other one, if it is warmer, is the ocean stay warmer longer? And that will be that we're going to have a longer hurricane season. Anyway.
I mean, those questions are the key. They are all key for understanding the process. I mean, yeah, for hurricanes to occur, we need the ocean water to warm up. So there is a threshold there. But not only that, we need moisture. So it's a combination between atmospheric and oceanic processes. So we need moisture. So if the ocean water warms up, this moisture goes up. And then we need also some conditions to happen for this moisture air mass to move. So yeah, I mean, since 2016 in the Pacific Ocean, in the North Pacific US area, we got an increased trend of ocean temperature. And the point is that this region is not used for two hurricanes to happen, because usually hurricanes in the Pacific form off the coast of the tropical Mexican Pacific coast. For example, they form in Colima or in Jalisco. That's the area where they form. That's the location where these conditions are appropriate for a hurricane to form. But now these hurricanes, well, they move up and they reach the Baja California Peninsula, and most of the times these hurricanes cross the Baja Peninsula and so on. But what happened with Hillary and last year with Hurricane K, and this year Hillary, 2 years in a row, hurricanes actually crossed parallel 28, which is usually that's the separation between Baja California and Baja California South, no? So usually those hurricanes go through Laguna San Ignacio, Guerrero Negro, they cross the peninsula, but these 2 times, last year, this year, they crossed farther up and they came parallel to the Baja California Peninsula, reaching latitude 31. That's where we are. So the situation is that for these hurricanes to move farther up, we need to have adequate warm conditions here so that they can keep on walking in a way, right? So if there is nothing that stops them and degrades them, they can actually come across and hit and land in our coasts. They don't usually land here, but this time Hillary, it landed in San Quintin, and San Quintin is not far from Ensenada. It's 300 kilometers away. So we were worried that this hurricane would actually land in Ensenada, and this area, Baja California and California, we are not ready for a hurricane to come. We are not used to them, and so we need to start preparing ourselves for the impact of these events. That's what I want to.
Yeah, just a quick comment. And if the hurricanes are going north, they are not crossing. I mean, one way or another, they are impacting on the other side because water will not get to the headwaters in Chihuahua. So it's either they go there and they'll get some rainfall there, or they move north. And what you're saying for me is extremely interesting to see rain in the middle of summer in California.
Exactly.
And not even rain. Now let's talk about a hurricane. Anyways, thanks, Amaya.
Loads of rain. I mean, so the rain season is changing. I mean, it could change. I don't know if this is changing or not. These are just specific events happening. So we need to keep on tracking conditions, monitoring, and seeing what happens next. But yeah, I mean, at the beginning, people don't even think of a hurricane hitting this area. But as I showed before, there is an article stating that in the mid-80s, 1850 something, there was a hurricane impacting San Diego. So it can happen. How often, we don't know. We don't know whether this is just a very unusual period in the history or whether this will happen more often. Thank you.
And following that question, Saul has another interesting question here. He's saying, from what I understood, with the information available, there is no evidence that there are evident changes in the hurricane season, but this last decade has been perceived with less precipitation, with an extraordinary drought that impacted entire border in 2011, or I guess he meant since 2011. Should we assume that these conditions are cyclical, or is it just a warning of what is yet to expect or to come? Because we are living drought. I mean, I guess this past summer was a record high temperature recorded ever. Warmer temperatures hit another record in the sea. You know, we're reaching those records in terms of drought, at least, or temperatures. So, but we still don't have like enough data, as you mentioned, you all mentioned, to point out the hurricane season or more water into the system in any way, right? Either it's precipitation or hurricane or whatever, right? We're still uncertain from that. So I guess his question is, and I'm trying to interpret Saul, your question is, where is this could be a warning of what we can expect in the future. I mean, things are changing and we're not prepared, and you never know where it's going to hit. Is that kind of the answer? Grace, go ahead.
Yeah, I believe maybe it's like the convergence of both issues, like the cyclical nature of, for example, the North American monsoon, and then the worsened conditions that are happening due to climate change. So maybe it's like the worst of both situations. Maybe that's what we're facing right now.
Santos, do you have a comment on that as well?
No, I was looking to his question on that, so I can answer on that. Like he mentioned, okay, can you go for that question, or you wanna talk on the?
Go ahead.
Question? So he mentioned in the lower Rio Grande, most water is used for export crops like peas, cotton, chili. If water used were switched to grow locally consumed food, would it help? Okay, so my answer is, it's not sure. It depends on like several conditions. If the crop or whatever you want to introduce, that should be suitable for this reason. Also, it can grow humid or like hot region areas. Also, how much amount of water is required to grow that crop. That's also we need to look. Also, local soil condition is mostly saline, so we have to look, can is like salt tolerant crop or not. So we have to also look that aspect. Also, we have to kind of see how much farmers they are getting income or profit out of the agriculture. Will be that same after introducing or start planting another new crop. So we have to look that economic aspect too. So it's just not switching the water. We have to look different aspects too. So that's why our AgriLife research is like doing research on introducing new crops. So for your information, we are introducing new crops, canola and quinoa. Those are salt tolerant and also less water consuming crops. So that kind of, we are trying to introduce new crops. Those can utilize less water, so we can save more water. So my expertise on water utilization, water use efficiency, that I'm trying to introduce new irrigation practices. Right now, mostly flood irrigation is or basin irrigation farmers they do. We are trying to introduce new irrigation practice so we can minimize water losses. Like we usually farmers they grow crops during summers, and because of the hot season, more water evaporation is happening. So we are trying to introduce deep irrigation or other irrigation practices, but there are still trials going on, and we are still developing some proposal ideas. but this can be happen in future. But like looking to the your question, there is a possibility. Okay, and there is one more person in our center is nutrition public health. So she always look at the aspects of like what type of crops we are growing and what the nutrient of those foods. So will our like local people will is getting enough nutrient that they can maintain their health or fitness. So we have to look all those aspects too. It's just not like introducing new crop to save the water, right? So that's our integrated research is happening in AgriLab. I hope I answer. Yeah, it can be doable. It's just like we have to look all the aspects. It's just not water.
It's complicated. Randy also mentioned that Hurricane Jimena in 2009 dumped a year's worth of rain on Guaymas on the Pacific. Is it no, that's the Pacific. Is another good example, and more recently Hurricane Beatriz. So yeah, I guess we need more time, right? And more events to figure
Yes,
out where are we going.
Can I add a little bit on that? I mean, when hurricanes happen in the Gulf of Mexico, usually the predicted tracks from NOAA are pretty precise. So I think there was a hurricane in Florida not that long ago where they actually engaged people to evacuate certain regions or certain cities. Whereas when this hurricane came a few months ago around here in Baja California, the uncertainty was really, really high. I mean, the first prediction was that the hurricane was going to hit Ensenada, and we were all like, oh my God. And then a few hours later, the track was changing, and then it changed again, and then it changed again, and so on. And at the end, it was a little bit far off. So what I want to say is that these predictions, the accuracy of these predictions will change depending on where we are. There are locations where, because they happen very frequently, models are well trained and they can provide pretty good and accurate tracks, whereas in some other regions, results will shift, predictions will shift, and that's the same with flooding and flooding alerts and so on.
Rosario. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, guys. Okay, gracias. Question for Grace. You mentioned that large stream flow events, floods, are needed for a healthy environment. Can you elaborate what is the work that these floods do to improve environmental conditions? Very good question.
Of course. So let's imagine we're in the river and it's a very dry season. So there is only like base flow maybe flowing through the river, and vegetation starts to grow in the riverbanks, and water has very little chance of overflowing the banks and inundating flooding the whole plain. So when a big flood comes, it resets the water quality that runs through the river, and it breaks the banks of the river so the water can flow through the floodplain. It removes vegetation, and it provides a lot of habitat for fish and other species for them to, I don't know how to say this in English, like to lay their eggs and to spawn and to grow up. And they also provide, like, floods provide migrating cues to fish, so they know when the water comes, it's like, oh, let's go upstream or downstream, whatever. And I think it also recharges the shallow groundwater. And yeah, I think like redistributing sediment, recreating the habitat for fish and other species, I think those would be the most important functions of floods, because we usually think of them as in terms of human infrastructure and the risks are associated with them. But the river, it's a very, I mean, it was called Rio Grande for a reason. It was very it had a huge discharge stream flow, and floods were recurring every year at least. And right now floods don't occur, like 20% of it occur right now, something like that. So it's lost those functions.
Yeah, thanks, Grace. And I always also think when we have the background of this, that I mean, the river looks amazing, but we have here Orondodonus, an invasive species that it really is kind of poking their face like, hi. And then with bigger floods, we can get rid of these without actually all the chemicals, right? Yeah, I always think about it like it's a nice picture, but yeah, this is one of the key issues. Thanks. I also put it in there, Rosario, to the link of the how is the state of the reservoirs and stream flows. And the bigger reservoirs, I mean, when we talked about praying for rain, they are 40% ish. And this is the end of the dry season, actually the end of the wet season.
Season, exactly.
So we are at 40% on the big ones, of the biggie ones, at the end of the wet season. So and from here on the Rio Grande, it will be like what, 6 months, 8 months to the bigger rain events. So anyways, yeah, when we were talking about praying for rain, just look at those numbers.
Yeah, perhaps we need to pray for continuous and not too heavy rain, because when this hurricane came across a few weeks ago, and people were expecting reservoirs to be filled up and so on, and the aquifer of Valle de Guadalupe, for example, it didn't recharge really. I mean, it was superficial flow, fast flow. So the soil gets moistened and saturated very quickly. And at the end, all the water goes onto the ocean. So yeah, maybe we need to pray for more frequent and less intense rain.
Fast
Maya,
water. We need to deal with fast water.
Yeah, I think that can be a good summary of what we're discussing here. Yeah, there is a very good question there about food security, about what to grow. And I don't know, I think for my take, a tiny bit of climate smart agriculture. So crops that are adequate to the climate that we're putting in them. And then depending on that, then people can decide if they more expensive, less expensive. But yeah, also they growing the food. I'm really all for growing food, not processed food. And that one is a different one. We can get there. I don't know I'm just looking at the time and some other questions, but among this conversation, I don't know, for Grace and Tusha, Maya, is there any comment or any insight that we didn't ask that you want to share with us about where we are and what is coming ahead? How can we be prepared for it?
Yeah, maybe to close up, right? I would say we need to keep on measuring, monitoring, and we need to put an eye on things, how the ecosystems are responding. And in particular, I was really lucky to measure Hurricane Harvey in Texas, in southern Texas. That was a few years ago. We were involved in this project, and we deployed some instruments, not expecting Harvey to happen, obviously. And the hurricane came across, and we were lucky to measure waves and flows between Port Aransas and South Padre Island. And that was great, because then now we know the strength of the flows when a high energetic hurricane impacts that area. But then we need to do the same for these forthcoming events. So let's keep on measuring and monitoring. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and Amaya, in that region, definitely a lot of the lower Rio Grande, Bajo Rio Bravo rely on precipitation. I mean, the crops there, they rely on precipitation. And just flipping a coin and not seeing if rain is coming or not,
Yeah, I know.
or how intense. Anyways, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Santosh, Grace.
Do you have
Yeah, I
final
think,
thoughts? Go ahead.
yeah, he asked about we're exporting water to China via Pecan. I think that's something business. I'm not sure what should I comment on that, but I would mostly look on what we can do for regional farmers and for the society. So I think that's something business question. I don't know how to answer that, but yeah, I understand there is something export is happening, and because of that, we are exporting our water to, yeah, maybe some other panelists if they have any comments on that.
And Santosh also, I mean, the counter of this one, and I've seen it mostly in California, is that yes, we're exporting, but during droughts, we also export a lot of food. And I've seen specifically in California that with the droughts, we didn't have that much of a heavy hit on the having certain produce because we were importing food. So yes, we're producing and exporting food, and I get it. And with that, water exported and dollars exported and subsidies exported. But on the other hand, is the opposite. And I think we're in the agriculture more responsible. Don't harm the environment, don't harm the society. But anyways, yeah, and I also like kind of the bigger perspective, Santosh. Anything on the bigger perspective about what is happening that you larger regional perspective that you want to share with us?
Well, that's, I think, we are trying to introduce new things or new practices or crops in this region. That's I can talk about now about agriculture. Or I think canola is not from our region, but it's just like another side. And we are trying to introduce in this region because it's just salt tolerant and less water consumptive crop. So we are trying to diversify cropping patterns so we can sustain agriculture production and also maintain the farmers so in their economic return or economic profit.
Yeah, thank you, Santosh. Grace,
Grace.
qué gusto tenerte
Mhm.
por acá.
Thank you. Gracias.
Final thoughts.
Well, I was thinking about something that Saul said about the cyclical nature of rainfall and the treaty. I know we weren't supposed to mention the treaty, or the focus is not the treaty, but it was drafted and signed during a very wet period. So it is cyclical. So I wonder what's going on right now with the amendments, or how do you say, like new adaptations that are being drafted into the treaty, if there are any at all, that could consider effectively this cyclical nature as well as the uncertainty related to climate change. And that would be it, I guess.
Thank you, Grace. And that was a good point, by the way. Not many people knows it. When it was signed, it was really a wet period. Anyway, I think we are very close to closing this session. I'm gonna let Gabby. Gabby, are you there
Yeah, I'm here.
to close the session?
I'm here, safe and sound. So thank you, everybody, for those excellent presentations. We're a little bit scared about this lack of information for the future, but let's work together and let's address these challenges together as scientists and as a society. So thank you very much for being here and for sharing with us. And to the public, if you're interested into participating or to share your research in the following science talks, you can contact us through any of these channels. So this is your forum. Remember, this is a forum for everyone. You can participate and follow us on social media. Thank you again to our sponsors, and see you next time.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Thank you,
Amalia,
everyone.
Santos, Grace. It was great to see you.
Gracias. Thanks, everyone.
Gracias.
Esperen, voy a
Thank you.
copiar un correo que me pidieron
Gracias.
algo. Voy a copiar un correo.
Nos vemos, hasta luego.
Nos vemos.
Gracias, nos
Gracias.
vemos. Mucho
Gracias.
gusto.
Gracias.
Listo, yo lo tengo. Gracias, bye.
Gracias, Grace. Excelente
Alfredo,
presentación.
gusto en verte.
Gracias. Y buenas ranas.
Bye, bye.
¿Alguien me puede detener el live? Oh, yo lo puedo detener, ¿verdad?